The courtroom was silent. Not the kind of silence that brings peace. This one was heavy, like a storm waiting to erupt. The kind that prickles at your skin, whispers down your neck, and makes you look over your shoulder. And in the middle of that silence stood Lieutenant Commander Kara Dalton, a Navy SEAL sniper, handcuffed. Her wrists, calloused from years of weapon training, glinted with the cold bite of steel. The very hands that had once saved dozens of lives were now bound like a criminal's. The uniform she wore still bore the ribbons of valor, the patches of her unit, and the blood of countless missions, foreign and classified. She stood tall, not defiant, not broken, just still like a hunter before the kill, or a soldier at the gallows. The judge cleared his throat, but even he looked uncomfortable. No one could meet her eyes. Not the prosecutor, not the journalist crowding the back, and certainly not the two young military police officers, flanking her, both visibly nervous, their fingers twitching near their belts. Kara didn't look at any of them. Her gaze was fixed on the double doors at the back of the courtroom. They hadn't opened yet, but she knew someone was coming. Someone who had the power to shift the air, shake the earth, and silence this circus of betrayal. She just had to stand there and wait. 3 weeks earlier, Kara was in the Hindu Kush, perched on a ledge 9,000 feet, above sea level with her sniper, rifle trained on a convoy of hostile insurgents. Her spotter, Petty Officer Reyes, was murmuring coordinates beside her. Winds shifting on 2 degrees east. Just 10 clicks. Kara didn't respond. She never did. She just adjusted, held her breath, and fired. 3 targets dropped in perfect succession. Clean, unquestionable. "Shadow, you're a damn ghost," Reyes whispered. She pulled the bolt back, reloaded, and said, "Not a ghost. Just precise." But that mission, successful as it was, had a complication. One of the targets was not just a confirmed arms dealer, but also a known asset. Someone who, as it turned out, was feeding intel back to U.S. allies. No one had told her that. The op was classified as black, need to know. She was told to neutralize the convoy, and she did. Then they blamed her. They said she acted outside her orders. They said she fired without confirmation. They said she ignored a ceasefire command. None of it was true. But now, here she was, back home, standing in a courtroom, while whispers about treason and disobedience circled like vultures above her head. The prosecution's case was brutal, dressed in legal jargon and polished tones, but laced with venom. They called her reckless, disobedient, even unstable. They dragged up an old psych eval from after her 3rd deployment, one where she'd admitted to trouble sleeping and occasional nightmares. They never once mentioned the 9 hostages she'd saved in Kandahar, or the time she took a bullet shielding a fellow SEAL from enemy fire, or the hundreds of hours she spent mentoring female recruits who thought they'd never belong. Her defense attorney, Commander Mark Tillman, was seasoned, intelligent, and clearly frustrated. "This is a scapegoat operation," he told the press the night before. Lieutenant Commander Dalton followed orders. If command didn't share critical intel with her, that's on them, not her. But it was falling on deaf ears. The court of public opinion, especially in uniform, was swift and ruthless. And no one wanted to go up against the brass behind this setup. No one except one man. But he hadn't arrived yet. Kara's memory slipped to a different courtroom, 8 years ago, where she stood in her dress whites and received her promotion to lieutenant. Her father, a former Marine pilot, sat in the front row with tears in his eyes. Her mother held his hand, bursting with pride. That day felt like it belonged to someone else now. Another life. Another war. "Name?" the bailiff barked, yanking her back to the present. "Lieutenant Commander Kara Dalton," she said. "Rank and number?" "SEAL Team 6, serial number 19874 Delta Zulu." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Someone from SEAL Team 6 standing trial? Unheard of, unbelievable, but it was happening. And still, the doors at the back remained closed. Far across the base, a black government SUV tore down the private access road. Inside sat Admiral James Renner, former head of Joint Special Operations Command, now retired. Silver hair, eyes like razors, and a jawline that hadn't moved in anything less than fury in years. The young driver glanced nervously at him. "Sir, are you sure you want to do this?" the JAG office said. "I don't care what they said," Renner snapped. "I trained that woman. I sent her into half those missions. And if they're going to hang her out to dry, then I'm walking in that courtroom whether they like it or not." "But sir—" "Drive." Back in the courtroom, the prosecutor began his closing statement. She was told to wait. She was told to confirm. She did neither. And as a result, an Allied informant whose data may have saved hundreds of lives is dead. This isn't just a mistake, Your Honor. It's betrayal of protocol, of country. Kara's fists clenched in her cuffs, but she said nothing. No defense was needed, not yet. Because it wasn't over. Not until he walked in. 10 years ago, when Kara was still a candidate. She'd trained under Admiral Renner. He was the kind of man who believed in two things: precision and loyalty. She had both. Once, during training, a male candidate had tried to sabotage her gear before a night dive. Renner found out. The next day, the candidate was gone. No one ever spoke of it again. Renner had seen something in Kara most others didn't. Clarity, a kind of mental sharpness that couldn't be faked. She didn't shoot to kill. She shot to end chaos. The defense began calling its own witnesses. Reyes spoke first, standing rigid in his uniform. She followed orders to the letter. There was no ceasefire command. And if that man was an asset, it wasn't in our brief. Did you hear her disobey a single directive? Tillman asked. No, sir. Not once. Did she endanger any civilians? Negative. She saved lives that day. But the prosecution objected. Called it biased testimony. Claimed Kara had groomed loyalty within her team, whatever that meant. The judge leaned back, skeptical, tired. That's when it happened. The courtroom doors slammed open. Every head turned. 2 MPs moved to intercept, until they saw who it was. Admiral James Renner strode in, not in uniform, but in something more terrifying: authority. Every officer in the room stood without thinking, a reflex, an instinct. Even the judge looked startled. Your Honor, Renner's voice boomed. With all due respect, this trial is a farce, and I intend to testify. The room froze. Kara, still handcuffed, met his eyes for the first time in 3 years. He nodded once. That was all she needed. Because now the war was no longer hers alone. And as the judge struggled to regain order and the prosecution scrambled to object, the tide began to turn. Justice had just walked into the room, and its name was Renner. Admiral Renner didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for the judge to acknowledge him or even give the prosecution time to regain its breath. He simply walked to the front of the courtroom like it was a war room, not a place of law. His presence bent the air, snapped every back straight, and hushed every whisper. Sir, the judge finally stammered. This is highly irregular. Irregular? Renner raised a single eyebrow. So is dragging a decorated Navy SEAL through the mud for a mission you classified and you mishandled. Murmurs exploded around the room. Your Honor, the prosecutor objected, standing quickly. This man is retired. He has no standing in this case. Renner's voice cut through him like shrapnel. Son, I held your rank before you ever wore a uniform. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further. The judge, clearly torn between protocol and the magnitude of what was happening, finally nodded. Admiral Renner, if you have testimony relevant to this case, you may proceed. But I will not tolerate grandstanding. Renner smiled. I didn't come to grandstand. I came to clear a name. Kara could hardly believe what she was seeing. Renner hadn't just entered the room. He'd taken it over. She remembered being 24. One of the only women in Bud's training. Watching this same man evaluate candidates like wolves inspecting meat. He'd barely spoken to her then, but when he did, it was always deliberate. Precision is your ally, he'd once said. But silence is your weapon. Now he was breaking his own rules for her, and that meant something. I oversaw Operation Blind Viper, Renner began, addressing the room like a commander before a combat mission. It was one of the most sensitive cross-border ops we've ever undertaken. The enemy convoy targeted was transporting illegal uranium components through Taliban territory. He paused, let it settle. The team was given clearance to engage with extreme prejudice. That phrase is not ambiguous. It does not mean wait. It does not mean ask again. It means terminate the threat. He turned to the prosecutor. You know what that means, don't you? The prosecutor said nothing. The man you're mourning, this so-called informant, wasn't listed in our friendlies database because he wasn't friendly. He had been removed from the CIA's protected list 2 weeks prior due to suspected double dealing. The data had not been updated in field briefings yet. That's on intelligence, not on the operator in the field. He pointed at Kara. She did her job. She protected her unit. And she neutralized a convoy that could have fueled a dirty bomb in Kabul. Silence. Then a single voice from the gallery whispered, Oh my God. The judge leaned forward, eyebrows drawn. Are you saying this entire case is based on outdated intelligence? Yes, Your Honor, Renner said calmly, and a convenient desire by certain higher-ups to save face by blaming the one person who couldn't talk back until now. Kara inhaled deeply. She hadn't known all that. She only knew what she'd seen, a convoy, armed to the teeth, headed toward a refugee route. The kill order had been clear, but Renner's words lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Someone had believed her. Outside the courtroom, media vans began flooding the base perimeter. Word had spread fast. A retired admiral testifying spontaneously in a court-martial was rare enough. Doing so on behalf of a female SEAL sniper? Unheard of. Journalists scrambled to find her mission records, her past interviews, anything. One headline was already going viral. The sniper they tried to silence, and the admiral who broke rank. But inside the courtroom, not everyone was impressed. Commander Stevens, a career officer who had once competed with Renner for a Pentagon post, stood slowly in the prosecution's team and addressed the judge. Your Honor, if I may, this is dramatic. I grant you that. But it doesn't change the fact that Lieutenant Commander Dalton acted unilaterally in a highly sensitive mission. The Admiral's claims haven't been verified. Through proper intelligence channels. Renner turned. You want verification? He reached into his coat and pulled out a thin leather-bound folder. This is a declassified transcript from a field briefing recorded by Joint Command. Dated 2 days before the strike. It includes a direct verbal order to engage all vehicles matching the convoy profile, including the one Dalton neutralized. The judge looked stunned. Why wasn't this submitted earlier? Renner stared at Stevens. Ask him. Stevens's jaw tensed. The courtroom erupted in murmurs again. Kara closed her eyes for a moment. This wasn't over, but the tide had shifted. Her father used to say, battles are won in inches, not miles. She'd just gained 10 feet. Renner wasn't done. I also have satellite images from before and after the strike, he said. They show that the target vehicle had been flagged by 3 NATO assets prior to its disappearance into civilian zones. Kara Dalton prevented that crossing. She saved lives. He paused. And what did she get for it? Chains, court dates, and silence. He turned toward Kara. I trained her. I watched her make split-second decisions that would paralyze most men. I saw her lead recon under fire, extract wounded with 0 air support, and return with not just intel, but integrity. She is not the enemy here. Tillman, her defense attorney, stood again, but this time his voice was steady and emboldened. Your Honor, I move that charges be dropped and this proceeding ended, pending a review of the new evidence. The judge looked around the courtroom, then at Kara. For the first time, his gaze softened. But before he could speak, Commander Stevens interrupted again. There's still the matter of the classified report. She submitted afterward. The one where she accused her chain of command of strategic negligence. Everyone turned. Kara tensed. She hadn't meant for that report to leak, but it had. And now it was being weaponized against her. Renner didn't blink. She filed that report because she believed people would die if they didn't listen. That's not insubordination. That's leadership. The kind we're supposed to reward, not crucify. The judge tapped his gavel once. Enough. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow morning. I will review the new documents and determine how we proceed. As the courtroom emptied, Renner approached Kara for the first time. She looked up at him, eyes tired but burning. He didn't smile. But his voice was soft. You held your ground. Just like I trained you. She nodded. Thank you, sir. He shook his head. Don't thank me. I should have been here sooner. Then he looked at her cuffs. Let's get those off. The courtroom was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like a noose tightening around Kara's neck. It felt like the breath before a verdict. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse. Protesters lined the perimeter fences, some in full support, waving signs that read, "Protect those who protect us." Others less kind, fueled by fear, by misinformation, by the simple idea that no one should be bigger than the system. Inside, Kara sat, still cuffed, her hands resting calmly on her lap. Beside her, Commander Tillman organized papers he no longer needed. Admiral Renner stood at the back, arms crossed, silent as stone but with fire behind his eyes. And then the judge walked in. All rose. Judge Reinhold sat slowly, carefully, like the weight of the moment demanded reverence. He looked across the room, eyes touching on Kara, on Stevens, on the gallery. He began. This tribunal has reviewed all evidence submitted, including the declassified operational briefings, SAT intel, witness testimonies, and the defendant's after-action report. A pause. Let me be clear. The purpose of this court is not to undermine authority or to challenge national policy. It is to determine whether a soldier, in the heat of war, acted outside her lawful duties. Another pause. In this case, she did not. Gasps. Kara didn't blink. She just listened. Lieutenant Commander. Dalton's actions were in accordance with her orders and consistent with the situational demands of her environment. Furthermore, the tribunal acknowledges that she demonstrated initiative, discretion, and went above all in integrity. He leaned forward. In a time when truth is often buried beneath rank, she chose to speak it. And then finally, charges dismissed. The gavel fell. The room didn't erupt. It exhaled, like a collective breath had been held for too long. Renner didn't move. Tillman did. He turned to Kara, barely suppressing a grin. "You just made history," he whispered. But Kara didn't smile. Instead, she held out her wrists. One of the MPs, the younger one, the one who had looked like he might faint when cuffing her the first day, stepped forward. He unlocked the chains. They fell away with a sound louder than gunfire in her ears. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like weightlessness. Kara walked out of the courtroom on her own feet. The sun was blinding outside. Cameras flashed instantly. Questions were shouted from every angle. "Lieutenant Commander, how does it feel? Do you still trust the Navy after this ordeal? Will you be returning to active duty?" She paused at the steps. Then she simply said, "Justice isn't the end. It's the start," and walked on. Renner followed behind her, shielding her from the mob with nothing more than presence. Back at the base, Kara entered the quiet of the chapel. She hadn't prayed in a long time. But now, sitting alone in the wooden pews, she didn't talk to God. She listened. And what she heard was peace. The next day, Kara met Renner by the ocean. The old man stood watching the tide like it held secrets only he could read. "You never gave up," she said. He shrugged. "You made it impossible." A long silence. Then he added, "They want to promote you, full commander. You'd take over training at Coronado." She raised an eyebrow. "Me? Train SEALs? You'd be the first woman to run the program. And they'd follow me? They'd damn well have to." She chuckled. Then finally, "I'll think about it." Later that evening, Kara stood in front of her old team, Reyes, Morgan, and even Mason, who had flown in for the verdict. They raised a glass. "To the one they couldn't break," Reyes said. "To the one who broke the silence," Morgan added. Mason, the quietest of the group, simply said, "To Shadow," and they drank. But even in victory, Kara knew something deeper had begun. This wasn't just her story anymore. Other voices would rise, soldiers silenced by fear, operators discarded by red tape, warriors who had done the right thing and paid the price. She would lead them, not as a symbol, as a shield. That night, she wrote a letter. Not to Command, not to JAG, not even to Renner. To the next woman. The next SEAL. The next recruit who would be told she didn't belong. She wrote, "They put chains on me because they feared my voice. But they forgot one thing. I was trained to fight even when bound." As the lights dimmed and the base quieted, Kara sat under the stars, the sound of the sea behind her. The war inside her was over, but the mission? That was just beginning. 6 weeks later, Kara Dalton stood at the edge of a different battlefield, one without bullets or blood, but no less dangerous. She was standing at a podium inside, a massive steel hangar at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. In front of her sat the latest class of BUD/S candidates, roughly 180 men, and 4 women. Most of them stared with curiosity, some with skepticism, and at least a few with poorly hidden disbelief. She could hear the unspoken doubts. She's the one they tried to court-martial. She's the SEAL who called out command. She's the one who came back from it. She leaned forward into the mic. "I'm not here to impress you," she said. "I'm here to train you not to die." Silence. Perfect. Renner stood off to the side, arms folded, watching with pride. He had officially retired for the second and final time. But Kara had insisted he be present. "Call it sentimental," she'd told him. "Or maybe I just want the ghost who taught me how to survive to watch me pass it on." Now she was doing exactly that. Kara walked across the deck as the recruits followed her out toward the obstacle course. She didn't need notes. She didn't need a whistle. She had presence, and stories written in scars. "Anyone here think the system is perfect?" she asked. No one answered. Good, because it's not. She stopped in front of the low-crawl tunnel filled with sand and seawater. "But that doesn't mean we don't serve. We fight for what's under the uniform. The brother and sister next to us, civilians who'll never know our names. The values that matter when no one's watching." She pointed at the tunnel. "Now crawl." And they did. Every one of them. That night, Kara returned to her barracks. A small package waited for her. No name, just a return address from DC. Inside was a worn Navy Cross medal, one she'd never been awarded, and a single line on a note. For the war you fought that no one else could see. JR. She smiled. Admiral Renner had pulled strings again, but not for glory. For closure. A month later, Kara received a request. Congressional hearing. Classified panel. They wanted her to testify about intel breakdowns in combat operations. She said yes. Not because she wanted to play politics, but because she refused to let someone else speak for her again. At the Capitol, a senior senator leaned into the mic and asked her bluntly, Lieutenant Commander, do you think the U.S. military has a culture of silencing whistleblowers? She didn't flinch. I think it has a habit of punishing truth-tellers, because truth makes people in power uncomfortable. And why did you come forward? Because I swore an oath. Not just to obey, but to defend. That includes defending the truth. There was no applause. But there didn't need to be. The record now carried her voice. After the hearing, a young female cadet intercepted her outside. Ma'am, she said nervously, my name's Officer Cadet Amanda Lee. I'm headed to SEAL selection next year. Kara smiled. You sure about that? Yes, ma'am. Then do it like your life depends on it. Because someone else's will. The cadet saluted. Kara returned it. Years later, long after she'd left active command, her name became something different. Not controversial, but foundational. The Kara Dalton Integrity Clause was written into Navy policy, a rule that guaranteed protection for operators, reporting mission-critical flaws in real time. They gave it her name without asking. She didn't mind. Because it wasn't about her. It was about the next shadow. One quiet evening, Kara visited the cemetery at Arlington. She stood in front of a headstone bearing her father's name, Major Thomas Dalton, USMC. She whispered, I stayed in the fight, Dad, even when it went off the battlefield. She placed her trident pin beneath the stone and walked away lighter than she'd ever felt. They once tried to shackle her for telling the truth. But in the end, she rewrote the rules. Not with rage, but with resolve. Not with bullets, but with backbone. Not with vengeance, but with victory.